Sometimes it's the very people who no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine.
Humanity does this to us.
Not if we show them a better path.
Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look, and you'll see into your imagination.
We have to have the ontological wonder towards the ground of meaning.
But I've been doing recent work. I gave an invited lecture at Cambridge about the imaginal and its relationship to rationality. What I mean by rationality, and I'm filming my next series after Socrates, and there's a whole section where I'm talking about how the Neoplatonists try to integrate the imaginal back into sort of the depths of philosophy. So I don't know if you're aware of the distinction that Corbin makes between the imaginary and the imaginal. Would it be worthwhile for me to quickly say what that is?
I've got an idea, but I could be wrong. So if you like to unpack what you mean there.
Sure. And I'll ground it in a concrete thing. And then I'll try and show how, just one quick point about how you can, not exhaustive, but exemplary of how you could see how it functions necessarily within what I'm calling rationality. So Corbin made a distinction, but the imaginary is when you picture things in your head and it's not for the sake of perception, and you're in some sense escaping from the limitations of reality. Yeah. That's the imaginary. Okay. And it sort of maps onto what Tolkien meant by escapist fantasy. Yeah. And then the imaginal is imagination for the sake of enhancing perception. And the given deep learning and predictive processing, this now makes tremendous sense, right? Most of perception is imaginal in this sense. Go ahead.
So if I may just comment there, this is precisely the distinction I make between what I call imagination and fancy, following Wordsworth and Coleridge,
Yes.
who are the greatest writers in the English language on this particular topic. And what they meant was the distinction exactly between fantasy that takes us away from reality and imagination, which is our only chance to enter into reality.
Right. And there's a connection, I believe. I know Coleridge has a huge influence on Barfield, and I believe there's some, I don't know if it's directly between Barfield and Corbin, but I think they both influence Hillman and others. So I'm aware there's connections between those two bodies.
And there's also importantly, Coleridge wasn't the beginning of this, because he learned a great deal from Schelling, and more or less lifted some of it out of Schelling. So it goes down the line from there to, in our time, or more recent time anyway, Owen Barfield and so on, yeah.
And I think Borthoff is right, that it actually goes back, you can see it in Goethe. And when Goethe is trying to get the plant, he's inventing the imaginal act of perception.
Yes, that's a very good point. And he also makes distinctions which are remarkably apt about the difference between the world provided by the right and the world provided by the left hemisphere, incidentally. But there we are. Anyway.
So the point I was making, and so, for example, when I'm teaching, but thank you for that enrichment. Curt, you wanted to say something. Should I continue, or?
I want to see if this is correct. So the imaginary versus imaginal, the difference is one of intent. The reason why is, like, if one plays video games, they're escaping, or they can be, but yet they still acquire skills that they can use in the real world.
Under the right circumstances, right? But it's also what the phenomenology of the act. So let me try and say. So usually the imaginary involves picturing in your mind. Like if I ask you right now, imagine a sailboat. Are the sails up or not down? And you can say they're up or down. You can tell me that. Whereas if a child is imagining being Zorro, they are not picturing anything. They're picking up a stick, tying a blanket around them, and they're taking on the salient landscaping of Zorro, getting a taste of what it would be like to have Zorro's perspective, to have Zorro's identity, and see what that feels like for them in terms of skills they might want to cultivate, identities and roles they might want to enter into. It overlaps with developmental play. And so the phenomenology is also very fundamentally different. I use it when I'm teaching Tai Chi. When I'm telling people to stand, I say, I want you to imagine that you're standing in a river and from your knees to your feet are sinking into the mud. So you're trying to get that feeling of rootedness. And then from your knees to around your navel is like flowing water, because that's you want that area of your body. And from here up is like air. You want to give it very little attention and it dissipating. And that helps people get into the proper way of inhabiting their body in order to optimize it for, Tai Chi Chuan for sparring. Now, that for example, that's one example of how the imaginal helps ratio. But Hirschfield and others, just you go into people, the academics who are supposed to be the best, right? And you give them clear argument and evidence that they should start saving for the retirement. You make sure they understand, you allow them to voice any disputes, you get agreement from them all. You come back in 6 months, none of them are saving for the retirement. Then you do the following. And of course you have control groups and everything. I'm just giving the experimental group. You ask them to imagine their future self as somebody that they love and care about. That's somebody that they have a relationship and a responsibility to, a member of their family. You come back in 6 months and you'll find two things. They are now saving, and the people that more vividly imagined that future self were able to save even more. And you say, so what? The ability to aspire to your future self, and this is Agnes Callard's argument, is central to rationality. Rationality is ultimately about self-correcting. It's about aspiring to become more rational, wiser than you are. And therefore, the ability to properly aspire is dependent on the imaginal, yet it is central to rationality. And therefore, they are inseparably bound together. And this is something I think Plato deeply, deeply understood, because he'll give an argument, and then he'll give the parable of the cave, and he'll put the two side by side. So you're right, the imaginal and the rational are interwoven together. And like Ian said, we have now set them into this weird opposition, which doesn't actually make very much sense. I suppose it could be because of the prevalence of entertainment in which the imaginary or the fanciful is taking priority over places in which people properly enact the imaginal. And I propose to you that those places traditionally have been ritual, the serious play of the imaginal, in order to enhance people's sense of connectedness, especially to their future self.
If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to do it. Want to change the world, there's nothing to it.
Hurry up, Violet! This way, Grandpa.